Hey BJ, Spencer here. Really glad to see that you're back on the mic and enjoying your contributions to RPG a Day month. Hope you can get them all in before the end of the month. Take care.
Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hey, everybody, I'm back. That was Spencer, also known as Free Thrall, the host of Keep Off the Borderlands, another great podcast here in the former Anchorverse, now just part of Spotify for podcasters. If you don't listen to his podcast, go check it out. He's always got some interesting things to say. And it's good to hear your voice, Spencer. Again, it's good to be back. We'll try the sound quality on this. I was gifted by my wife a really cool microphone for Christmas, specifically for podcasters and people who do recording at home. And so we'll see if it improves the sound quality, what that's like on this episode. It's certainly nice to not have headphones on with a mic stuck up right against the side of my mouth. So hopefully this will work for the future for recording. So anyway, so again, that was Spencer. To start off the show, we got a couple more calls before we get into the meat of today's episode. So first up, or I guess next up, since Spencer was first, we have Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and let's hear what he has to say.
Hey, BJ, Jason here. Just listen to days 9 and 10 on your podcast for RPG Day. I kind of cheated on dice. I said big and easy to read, and that's not wrong. And I'm not really attached to individual dice, right? But I do have a type of dice that I really like, and that would be percentile dice. Whether it's, 2d20s marked 0 to 9 twice, or it's d10s. I really like percentile dice, and I could be happy if, for the rest of my life, I could only play games where the core mechanic were percentile dice. You're rolling D100s with 2 dice. I prefer the D20s over the D10s because D10s aren't platonic solids. They're kind of abominations, But, I guess we can kind of forgive them. They've wheedled their place into gaming culture. But, yeah, I really like percentile dice. I think it's intuitive. I think people are comfortable with it. It's easy to introduce people to the hobby with. You can do all kinds of interesting things with it, like have special results on doubles, like 33 or 66. You can have mechanisms where you can flip the dice to turn an 18 into an 81, or vice versa. Or you do like Rollmaster did, right? Where you can have open-ended D100. So you could go under 0 or over 100. So there's all kinds of great things you can do with percentile dice, and I'm pretty happy if I was stuck with only using percentile dice. I could be happy with that. As far as the tie-in fiction, I'm so glad you mentioned Appendix N. There's so many great things in Appendix N, and it's interesting. So we look at AD&D, and like you mentioned, you see the things that Gygax lifted and whatnot. But the other game to look at with Appendix N in mind is Dungeon Crawl Classics, because Joseph Goodman went and he read all the stuff in Appendix N, and then he wrote Dungeon Crawl Classics. And it's really interesting to see what his take was on that material and what he put into Dungeon Crawl Classics. And I love AD&D First Edition. I really do. I like all the little subsystems. I like all the kind of weirdness in AD&D, High Gygaxy and everything. But honestly, if you put a gun to my head, I'd rather play in Dungeon Crawl Classics. Dungeon Crawl Classics is my favorite high fantasy game. I really think that. I say that, knowing that Rollmaster is out there and is a percentile game. And yeah, there are other percentile games out there. But if I had to pick a percentile fantasy game, it very well might be Rollmaster has some flaws in it here and there. So I don't know. But I'm getting off topic here. But the point is Appendix N, and the point is it's interesting to see the take that Goodman took off Appendix N compared to what Gygax took off Appendix N. Mind you, Goodman had all that time in between to also think about these things and be influenced by things. So it's not a totally fair comparison because they didn't do it at the same time. but it is still an interesting thing to look at.
Thank you for the call, Jason. Yeah, I think percentile dice really. I think as gamers we get emotionally attached to the classic polyhedral dice, and it's like, well, we want a game that incorporates at some level every dice, which I think we've gotten to the point where it's pretty clear that if you're going to use the standard set, that the kind of the D20 runs the core of a D20 system, and we've really just got the percentile dice left over to occasionally roll on a table, and the other dice just to vary weapon damage and things like that. So I think we have a lot of times as gamers have an emotional attachment to the classic polyhedral dice set, range of dice that started with Dungeons and Dragons. I would agree, though. I think percentile dice make a lot of people. It's just intuitive for people to understand, and you can certainly use the mechanic of kind of a modern role playing game with percentile die, with just you sort of invert the difficulties to because into percentile to roll under, but it's really easy and it still makes complete intuitive sense for that, and people understand. I mean, when you're using a 20d20 system, I mean it's percentile in 5 increments. You just multiply any number on the die by 5, and that's your percentile. But seeing the percentile dice right out front, and I agree. I think I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, if it's just something that occurred to me about percentile dice. I think it is more satisfying to get, if you were going to do that, to get 2 20-sided die, because I think they feel better in the hand, and to have the old, the old style ones that are just marked, 1 to 10 twice, instead of 1 to 20, and use those as your percentile dice, just because they have a nicer feel, a nicer roll. You're right. The shape of the D10 that we use for percentile dice is really weird. I think same thing with a D8 and a D4. If you could somehow get those to be a little more approximate a sphere, a little more, that would be cool. I don't know if you've ever read Flatland. The old by I think it was Edwin Abbott way back. It was a critique of sort of kind of Victorian and Edwardian, orthodoxy, but in the land where the shapes occupy, the closer you are to a circle, the higher your status, and because it's the closer you are to perfection. So the more sides, the better. So I feel that way with the dice too. The closer they can get to actually be kind of a regular spherical or cubical object, the better they are without the weird points and angles that this kind of dice you can step on and not doesn't stick into the bottom of your foot like a caltrip. Anyway, so yeah, I agree with you on the percentile dice. You mentioned Goodman Games and in relation to Dungeon Crawl Classics and Appendix N, and I have the box sets for both Lankmar, Fafford and the Grey Mouser, and the most recent one. I just got it a couple months ago. Came through Kickstarter. Is The Dying Earth, which of course is the origin of Vancian magic that we use in Dungeons and Dragons and D&D adjacent games. And so, yeah, I think those really capture the feel. Goodman Games was a good, or Dungeon Crawl Classics is a good way to approximate some of those. I know Elric lives in the Chaosium. They have the rights to that, but I would really like to see Dungeon Crawl Classics take a stab at Michael Moorcock's stuff, just because I think it fits well. But then again, the way we have it now, the Elric systems use a percentile die, so pick your poison there, Jason. But thanks again for the call. Again, if you guys aren't listening to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, check it out. Now we've got one more call for today, and this is a call from Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents podcast. And so take it away, Karl.
Hey, BJ, I'll try not to yawn this time. Cool, Pendragon. I love the starter set for 6th edition. I want to play Pendragon again. I played it back in the mid-90s, and, well, it is since it had been recorded on Joe Richter's podcast mainly, that it ended in a debacle with some heavy duty PvP player betrayal because of player rivalry that ended up being a player character betrayal in game. And I would like to avoid that this next time. The other project I have with Pendragon, the rule set, is to try to convert or use Pendragon rules to run a game in Harn World, either in the Scandinavian analog or on the British Isles analog, ortholog, and get that going. I think I can do it. It might be able to work. So anyway, thanks for mentioning Pendragon. Oh yeah, we deal in lead. Let's get it to the table, or something else. I don't know. Some little time, so many games, so little time. Anyway, talk to you later.
Thanks for the call, Karl. Yeah, Pendragon. That would be. We got to do it, and we deal in lead. Yeah, let's get those. I think we need to establish maybe a regular, maybe one night a month to just say we're going to do a short one shot of every game on the shelf that we can't seem to get to the table, just to say we've played it and can speak with it a little more, with a little more a voice of experience when we talk about the game, instead of, oh cool, we've done an unboxing and look at these rules. Well, let's actually play them, even if it's just a couple of scenarios. I think that would be fun. So I'm game for that if you are. So again, everybody, it's Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents. We have, I don't know if it'll hit. I'm recording these last few episodes in a batch, so it'll probably will have hit by the time this episode comes out. But we've got an upcoming episode where I'm on Karl's podcast where we actually review the new Marvel Multiverse role playing game. We talk a little bit about the contents and the rules, and then we make a character. And I think he's going to put that on YouTube. That may be, I believe, if he does that, I will be my debut on YouTube. I've never been on a YouTube video that I'm aware of. So you get to put a face with the name and voice for anybody who hasn't met me in person. So look out for those things. I'm sure Karl will post them, and I'll if when they come up, I'm sure I'll mention them again in a future episode. Thank everybody. I want to thank everybody again for the calls, Spencer, Karl, and Jason. And so we'll move on to the topics for this episode so that we don't get too far behind, because we do want to land on finishing up on the last day of the month. So where are we? I'm going to have to take a break a minute and go back and look and see where we are on this list. So I will be right back. Okay, we're up to day 17 and 18. All right. So day 17, the funniest game you've played. Well, I've had a lot of laughs over the years and had some funny things happen on a case-by-case basis. I mentioned a couple of humorous deaths of characters and monsters in the day 13, talking about memorable character demises, which tend to be fairly, to me, the most memorable ones are typically always humorous, because it's rare that you get a glorious death in a role-playing game. It's usually more the dice do something against you, or you make a poor decision, and something ridiculous happens, and it's funny. So, at least in my experience. But the funniest game I've played, what comes to mind is actually the first 5th edition campaign that I ran after 5e came out. We played a little around, played around with the starter set. I did as a player, but then I cooked up a homebrew concept and ran it for a few months. That was actually the last in-person game I played with the group I play with online now, because I wound up taking another job and moving to a different town a couple hours away. And so, but this was sort of our last in-person game. Was our foray into 5e after the starter set with just some homebrew stuff. And I created the setup was they were in the city, and they had a little bit of a little kind of one session adventure in the city, and then the city came under attack and was destroyed, and they had to flee the city. And so the idea was the campaign is they're sort of part of this group of refugees fleeing from the destruction of this their home city, which is sort of the center of learning and civilization, and out into the wilderness. And there were several funny things that happened into that. First of all, when we were creating backstories, we imported the phase trio from Fate, where you create a little bit of a backstory for your character that helps you kind of focus in on your character concept. But there are 3 phases where you then are allowed to incorporate the other characters, the other players' characters, into different aspects of your backstory, so that there's a built-in connection for everybody in the party. Which I still prefer to use that even in other games when I can, because I think, you know, why how do you all know each other? Let's flesh a little bit of that out. Anyway, I did that. So the first thing that happened was one of the characters was a halfling who was a cook, and they poisoned the wedding party with, they gave a wedding party food poisoning. So and that affected some of the other characters. So that was kind of funny. And it's just it's a group where we don't take anything too seriously to begin with. But some of the other highlights, they've got some valuable items they've been asked to whisk out of the city as it burns. So some from the temple. They've got it on a wagon, and they're heading out of the countryside. Some scouts have gone on ahead and established a camp where the refugees are all heading, and they're kind of one of the last groups out of the city, and they're bringing some of these valuables that the priests at the temple have managed to rescue from everything burning. You know, the city's on fire, and so you've got they're still first level characters, I believe, at this point. And so they're going along, and they notice these wild boars kind of taking notice of them, and some of them trotting along. And so they're starting to wonder, why are these pigs? Well, maybe they're not wild. Maybe they're domestic pigs, and they've been scattered, and now they're just kind of instinctively looking for people. And so the druid in the group decides to cast Speak with Animals, and I wasn't sure how to adjudicate this. We're still kind of new to 5e as a system, but what it was, the encounter I was setting up is they aren't actually hogs or wereboars. And so that's the gig is up. I was going to have them I was going to play it out a little more until maybe nightfall, and then have them turn into humanoids and attack everybody. But the jig is up prematurely for me, because the druid cast Speak with Animals on one of these pigs, and I go, well, it's not an animal. So we had kind of a funny situation where the wereboars just shapeshift and attack. So you've got a chase now going where they kick up the mules pulling the thing, trying to outrun them, but one of the wereboars manages to jump on the back of the wagon. They can't knock him off. Nobody has magic weapons at that point, because they're first level characters, so you can't actually damage them with regular combat. So it became a matter of the barbarian and the fighter in the group wrestling with wereboars, while the ones with spells, I believe we had a bard and a wizard in the party, if I'm remembering correctly, just pinged it with damage dealing cantrips and just whittled it down. And so we got to have a lot of fun playing with some of the mechanics early on in 5e that a lot of people don't get to, like chase mechanics and grappling and wrestling. But they managed to, although they managed to get away from some of the other wereboars, because they would have been in a lot of trouble, I think, if several of them had got on the one that jumped on the back of the wagon, they had to wrestle down and hold down while everybody else is attacking him with cantrip spells and things like that. So we had a good exploration of the 5e rule set, and probably because that was such a fun game, that's why I still maintain that 5e is a good game, despite some of the dissatisfaction with older players, and also I think the last year or two, particularly dissatisfaction with Hasbro and its business practices, and how that as WotC now being a subsidiary of Hasbro, they're complicit in that to a certain extent. But anyway, good time with that. What was some other funny highlights? They came across an orc camp. They followed some tracks back to an orc camp. The orcs had been plaguing their these people, as they're kind of migrating and trying to find a place. They're headed towards, I think they were headed towards a pass in the mountains, but the orcs were harrying them, so they managed to track the orc raiders back to their camp. And there was I'd put a giant boar that the orcs kind of had in a mud pen in their camp, and the barbarian took one look at it and said, "I'm going to ride that." I kind of predicted he would do that, and he did. He jumped on the wild boar and the giant boar and rode it. I don't know if I can't remember if I had in my mind we're going to have some kind of connection between the wereboars they encountered early on and this tribe of orcs, but it just seemed like a lot of fun at the time. The other funny thing that came out of that was everybody rolled a trinket, and the guy playing the barbarian rolled a crystal, and he role played it to the hilt. He had this little crystal. He was a character with not very much intelligence or charisma. This crystal was sort of sacred to him. He was very precious to him, and so we played with people trying to take it from him, and the other players teased him about it in character, and it was all good natured. But about the time that not long after we wrapped up that, I remember what happened. He that character wound up running off into the forest. He got scared in a fight with undead. We switched DMs. I remember now what happened. We switched DMs, and he got scared by a I can't remember what kind of undead it was. It took off running him, and then the campaign ended not long after that. I may be mixing up. That may have been actually a set of characters before the one I did. But this is funny anyway. He had this crystal that he'd rolled, and he treated it, almost childlike, with an almost childlike possessiveness, like it was a teddy bear. And then that character wound up again getting scared by some kind of undead and running off into the forest. And we never really resolved what happened to him. The guy made a kind of a replacement character, and we moved on from there. But not long after the campaign ended and I moved, there was a story on the Oklahoma City News about, I can't even remember what it was about. There's a guy living in a school bus on a property out on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, and he was just sort of a free spirit. He didn't own the property. There was something went down on the property that the owner had been in trouble for something. And when the news crew went out to investigate, all they found is this guy who'd been sort of living in a renovated, remodeled school bus on the property at the permission of the owner. And he had he wouldn't give him a real name. He had like this kind of odd name he'd given himself, and he was just sort of kind of an eccentric. But when they go to interview him, he's wearing like no shirt and like some kind of modern clothes, but also like some feathers and beads and animal skin kind of things. And he's got a walking stick with a crystal attached to the top. And I'm like, oh, that's what happened to Adam's barbarian character. He wound up living in a broken down bus on a acreage on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, because this guy looked kind of like a wilderness D&D character, and he had this staff with a crystal atop. So that was a funny sort of epilogue to that campaign. And literally, it was just a few months after we ended that campaign and I had moved that news story hit. So I think that was probably the funniest game we played. Those early, I think it was actually two different campaigns. They blur together a little bit from 5e, but it was the same group of players, and we had a lot of fun and a lot of laughs with the starter set and a little bit of homebrew encounters with undead, and then my stuff with the wereboars and the orc tribe and things like that. So that's probably the funniest game we played for day 17. Day 18. What is your favorite game system? Wow, that's a tough one. I think there's sort of the ideal system that doesn't exist in it's only something I would look for in my head. And my ideal system would be a universal system that handles, that is at one point on one hand very rules light, with maybe just a couple of simple dice mechanics that you would use, but that it is flexible enough that it can handle kind of any kind of genre of role-playing game that you would want. That it could handle fantasy, sci-fi, superhero, horror, cops and robbers, spies, investigations. It would be flexible enough to work however you would want it to work. And I haven't found a system yet that does that, because you can create a core dice mechanic, but you seems like you need some sort of other thing to start to help reinforce and emulate a genre. If you've got a group of really good role players who can get immersed, I think it doesn't matter what system you're using if you've got a generic system. But sometimes that's a little hard to do, particularly once you kind of, after the first couple of sessions, you've kind of gotten into the campaign. It's not kind of new anymore. You're just kind of start to go through the motions. It's fun. You're enjoying yourself. But I think sometimes you need those added flares that they put into specific systems to help you emulate whatever genre you're supposed to be playing in. I do say some of the mechanical systems I really like. As far as favorite, right now it's probably a tie, and they're not that dissimilar, even though they use different dice mechanics. And that's the system that underlines Mongoose Traveler. I don't know. I think it's called the Cepheus system. It's a 2d6 system. It uses its own version of advantage and disadvantage. I can't remember what it's called right now, where you add a you roll 3d6 and 2d6, and if it's kind of an advantage situation, you take the two highest. If it's a disadvantage, you take the two lowest. Again, you're trying to hit a target number, and you've got sort of anchor points based on the distribution of a 2d6 roll for what's sort of a average, kind of typical, not guaranteed, but kind of a challenge. I believe is 8, and then anchor points up and down the scale. I think that's a good, and Traveler does a really good job of showing how skills get chained together with the Cepheus system, where your degree of success matters when you start to try to do things as a team. So, for example, a pilot, you're in a ship-to-ship battle. Well, the pilot makes a piloting roll to maneuver, and then the degree of success or failure, depending on what the target number is, applies to, say, the gunner who's about to try to target an enemy vessel with the guns on the ship. So the pilot's rolls 3 over the success. The gunner gets to add 3 for the pilot has positioned the ship during its maneuvering to convey that to the person firing the guns. Conversely, if they kind of fail the roll, they roll 1 or 2 under what they need to, the big effect is now they're kind of in an odd position. It makes it much harder for the gunner to aim straight. And you can sort of chain together what different people are doing to try to help each other out in those. So I like that very much. I think that's a real strength of that system. I'm also coming to appreciate more, playing a lot of Traveler lately, more appreciation for systems that don't involve class, where you don't do a lot of advancement. You just make an interesting character, and you get to live with that character and their skill set. And there's some slow advancement and things you pick up, but a lot of it is about acquiring more equipment and more connections to the world, in terms of resources and relationships and things like that. But I think sometimes in class-based and level-based games like D&D, there's a rush to want to level up, and sometimes we rush people through. You don't get to savor all your characters' abilities and test out what they can and can't do at a certain level before they get pushed to the next level, and then you've got a new suite of abilities that come on board. So I'm starting to appreciate, in terms of systems that are not level and class based. Although I say that, I do think, and then of course I'm talking about the core mechanic, not necessarily of the 5e D&D, but the D20 system, particularly the iteration that has come with 5e, where they've added advantage and disadvantage. I think that's a very elegant system as well, where it's pretty easy to understand. You want to you roll a D20, you want to roll high. There's anchor points for what's sort of a moderate challenge, a difficult challenge, easy things. With the keeping advice to the game master to some things are impossible. Just tell them not to roll. That's impossible. And some things are so easy. Don't make them roll for tying their shoes or walking through a door or mundane things like that. Just let them describe what they're doing. So, but when you need to roll, there's a good mechanic there, and then you factor in advantage and disadvantage in the way it uses just 6 simple ability systems on a standardized scale of pluses and minuses, so that different characters are better at different things, and not as good at other things, and so you get some diversity of characters there. I think that gets buried a lot of times in the fact that 5e is an exception based system. So that what really makes the character polishes and differentiates the different character classes, the different character species or ancestries is there's just a standard way that you do things with the D20 mechanic, and then special abilities, spells, class abilities, racial abilities give you an exception to how the normal rules work. It tweaks that system in some way so that you don't have to roll, or you get to roll with advantage, or you get a bonus to your roll, or and so you got to keep up with this suite of abilities that are exceptions to the normal rules. It would be interesting to see a D20 based system that's less exception based and more. I think kind of what I was describing about what I like about Traveler. It's just the dice, just do it. So those are the kind of systems I like. I really, and when you play enough games and you deconstruct enough of these systems, you can kind of figure out there's a way you can do a 2d6, you can do a 3d6, you can do a d20s, you can do it with percentile dice. So that's I think that's probably, if I was going to make one of those heartbreaker systems, it's good for everything. I think I would probably use a core mechanic that follows those principles. And then just try to get away again, keeping it rules light, where you don't have a bunch of, powers and abilities that are exception based that you have to keep up with and know how they interact. And it gets really clunky at that point. So anyway, I don't know if that definitively answers the question, but there's some discussion on systems. All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for day 17 and 18. Thanks for listening. I want to thank the callers that called in earlier. Be sure and check out their podcasts. And I'm going to stop it here, and I'll be back tomorrow with the next installment. Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.